Hi, Stitchers. Welcome to Tatreez Talk, where we share conversations about Palestinian embroidery. I'm Amani here with my co-host Lena, chatting with talented embroiderers and artists, sharing their stories, inspirations, and the cultural significance behind their work.
On today's episode, we're chatting with Veera, a Tatreez artist, organizer, folk herbalist, and writer. Welcome to Tatreez Talk, Veera. We're excited to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. I could probably speak for a lot of people to say that this was so needed. Aww. And especially in this awful time, I think this podcast has brought a lot of just joy to a lot of Palestinian hearts. And also, you know, as somebody who teaches Tatreez, I think there are a lot of non-Palestinians listening who are learning and really appreciating what you all do. So thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, thank you. That warms our hearts. I very much appreciate you saying that. So thank you for that. But we are thrilled to finally have you on and to chat with you. We have so much to chat about. I got a little sneak peek at your story, so I'm really excited and thrilled to share it with the rest of the world. So let us start first by chatting about your connection and your family's connection to Palestine.
So I'm Finnish and Palestinian. I know that's a weird mix. We're out here.
Yes.
To be honest, I think, Lena, you know that there's just a few other people I've ever even met who are Finnish and Palestinian. So I was born and raised in Finland. My dad grew up in a refugee camp in Beirut, Lebanon. And I think my family is originally from Galilee. I don't actually know for sure, but based on who they were and where they ended up, that's the likeliest explanation. And also there is a number of, my last name is Salomon, so there's a number of people with that last name from Galilee and specifically Nazareth, but just around the area. Mm-hmm. And of course, they could be from Jaffa and Haifa as well, but based on how their life cursively turned out, I doubt that they were city dwellers. Mm-hmm. I came to be this very irregular mix of peoples. Because both of my parents, so my mom was in college in the 1970s and 80s during the International Solidarity Movement, which is a movement that kind of percolated out of the radical 60s with the idea of solidarity, sort of what we're seeing a little bit right now, specifically of Global South leading solidarity and people in the West learning to be in solidarity and be in solidarity with struggles in the Global South. Of course, I will say that my mom is a raging Marxist-Leninist communist, so there's that part. But yeah, she was a student organizer. She is an artist. She's a costume designer and set designer by trade, and that is what she was going to art school for, allegedly. From what I've heard from family, she was pretty much just doing organizing and storming the parliament in a very non-Jan 6 way. It was just back in the day you could show up at the parliament and yell at all the parliamentarians and all the representatives.
Disclaimer, not January 6th energy. More
Disclaimer,
true resistance energy.
But real, she was doing a lot of, they were taking over buildings, they were doing political organizing, they were doing art. I was born and raised for the first couple of years of my life in a weird Marxist-Leninist commune.
Resistance baby, through and through.
This will come in. This exposition explains a lot about my life trajectory. So the student union that my mom was part of, they were very pro-Palestinian liberation. They were very pro the Chilean liberation movements, the liberation movements of Vietnam and a lot of other places. It was a very global movement. There was a lot of people in South America, a lot of people in the S1E region, in Africa, in Asia. And they hosted different speakers. And my dad came as I believe, as a propagandist for the PLO, so for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which had a huge cultural and propaganda arm. They, like a government in exile, they actually had a sort of if you took a department of propaganda and combined it with a Ministry of Culture kind of situation. And so my dad, from what I can gather, was kind of on a speaking tour across Europe. And I think my parents met through that and went to a party at the commune I was raised in, and the rest is, as they say, history.
And here you are. Our resistance baby turned into a resistance adult.
Something like that. And so I wasn't raised with my dad. I actually think that, I'm pretty sure that my dad died in the 1982 siege of Lebanon, which is something during this current crisis that I do want people to study, because this is not the first time that the settler colonial entity has done this exact thing. This conflict, this genocide is an actual genocide, but like these tactics of like bombing a city full of civilians are not new, and the world was watching then, and the world did not learn that lesson. And once people study that history, the same tactics literally exist. There is an actual massacre that the settler colonial entity enables in a refugee camp that mirrors exactly what is happening right now and what has happened in the 42 years since then. So, I'm pretty sure that that's kind of what my family went through. So I did not grow up with my dad, but I did grow up with the Palestinian identity as a political identity very much through my mom, and was always like very aware that ours is a political entity. And I don't think that that's unique to me. I feel like every Palestinian who has grown up, particularly like anywhere, but I feel like in this specific case, like in the West, like the moment that you enter a room and you speak to who you are, if it's a room that isn't full of other SWANA people and Palestinians, it is a political identity. And sort of that was like a very much the framework of my upbringing around that.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I always say like our existence is literally political, like just our existence. So I can definitely understand that. And you have a very unique story, but it's amazing to hear how both of your parents were such an active part of fighting for Palestinian liberation, and now it's something that is a part of your life and what you do. Can you tell us how, you mentioned the fact that your Palestinian identity was very much a political identity. So Tatreez also, as we always say, Tatreez is political, but there's also a cultural aspect to Tatreez. So how did Tatreez and the cultural Palestinian identity come into your life?
I very much grew up with this idea that this experience of actually being the only one ever in the room. I, growing up, knew exactly two other Palestinians. One was Yasser Arafat, and one was
You knew him personally? You knew him you had his phone number? On speed dial.
I feel like I had the world's first parasocial relationship with a celebrity through my identity as a Palestinian, being like, all right, so all Palestinians are Yasser Arafat. That's what I'm getting from TV. And then, weirdly, there was a very famous in Finland at the time, Finnish, Palestinian immigrant journalist who, moved to Finland, learned Finnish, and became a big part of the cultural landscape. But those were kind of the only people I knew who were Palestinians. And so I grew up with it as this very political entity. And I did grow up with some parts of the culture that are specifically political. We had a lot of Palestinian propaganda art in my household. That was a huge part of we also had a portrait of Malcolm X on the wall, that style of decorating. So
your mom is
my mom had a vibe. She had a vibe. So we had a lot of Palestinian resistance art, specifically from that period, that I grew up around. So a lot of the symbolism of it I was familiar with. I was familiar with olives, kufiyas, the birds, even the Tatreez in just terms of visual, a lot of representation of women. But I didn't grow up at all with any kind of understanding of what Palestinianness was besides that we are either victims or terrorists. So we are either terrorists on TV or victims on TV. And, you know, in my kind of late 20s, early 30s, I started thinking about how to, like, I have a really strong Finnish identity, just having grown up in, like, you know, on land that my ancestors have lived on a long time. Like, Finland is a kind of a weird monoculture. So on the one hand, I grew as like a complete outsider. Like, I didn't pass for white. Everyone was always wondering what I was and what my deal was. I also don't look anything like my very blonde mom. But like, still, like, living in that culture, you have an identity that's just like very uniform and informs how you are. And even though, and for a long time, like, my Palestinian identity was like kind of this otherness, was just the other. And so I, on purpose, kind of started working on how to construct a Palestinian cultural identity that, like, mirrored the things that inform my Finnish cultural identity. And weirdly, Tatreez was not my first stop. So I actually have always been interested in folk costumes and been interested in clothing as a form of expression. Like, that is, like, always been a thing for me. But it kind of did not really occur to me that beyond the kufia, there was something that was contemporary or something that I could really, like, understand. So, and I don't speak Arabic, obviously. So I chose the easy route, which the easy route is food. And I chose
the delicious route.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like, we have the best food. It's just, it just so happens.
Yep.
Ask anyone. This is not like, I'm being objective here. Having grown up in Finland, which also has delicious food and no spices, I'm sorry, we have the best food. So, and I'm a folk herbalist, so, like, through that, then plants became a big part of that, where I started growing Palestinian plants and Middle Eastern plants, Swana region plants more broadly, and also just, like, noticing what things that I grew, you know, were actually of Swana region origin. And I ended up at Tatreez. I had bought, like, I think Sheila Ware's book on traditional Palestinian costuming, which is a lot about Bedijan, and I had, like, read it, looked at it, like, I was interested in it, but, like, even in that context, like, thobes and the embroidery just didn't really seem like a thing that was really accessible to me. Like, I had never knowingly seen a thobe. I might have seen one in, like, the British Museum or something, but I was never around any of that. And so it didn't really feel like something that I could just, like, approach.
And honestly, Veera, like, I grew up, like, with Tatreez in the house, and it never crossed once did it cross my mind, oh, I could do that. That's something that
I agree.
like, it's something that feels like it's only made in Palestine. And, like, you just kind of like assume that that's it. But, like, even as someone who was surrounded by it in some shape or form, you know, it didn't feel accessible either.
Yeah. And even just to add on to it, Lena, like, it felt like it was something made in Palestine by some old hajib.
Exactly.
Who, like, you know, like, it didn't feel, I think, Veera, you said it didn't feel contemporary to me either. So I can also, like, I think we can all definitely relate to that before we started our Tatreez journeys.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it even to me, because I actually was really interested in traditional Finnish costume, and unlike most people my age, like, collected them and, like, wore them. Like, I wore one to my wedding. Well, my second wedding, I got married to the same guy twice. Anyway.
Another story. We'll talk about that later.
You know, it's just the immigrant marriage situation. You know how it goes.
We get it.
But yeah, so it just wasn't, like, my first stop. Like, it was like, I was like, this is beautiful. It seems like there's a lot of, like, really regional amazingness. Like, but it just seemed something that wasn't really for me. And even just, like, I don't know how other folks feel about it, but even just thinking about, like, appropriating your own culture in this weird way, where you're like, I want to step into something that I have no idea about. So I got into plants and food, and I was actually taking a class from Layla of River Rose Remembrance, and we were just, it's an all Swana class about plant medicine, and we were chatting, and someone mentioned that there was this book called Tatreez and Tea that was about embroidery, and that it had Palestinian tea recipes. And that is why I bought Wafa's book, Tatreez and Tea.
Yeah, it wasn't even for the Tatreez, it was for the tea. Oh my goodness.
I was interested, but I was like, oh, it has like specific recipes with specific plants, which like is actually kind of hard to find in English. Like there aren't a lot of books about herbalism specifically, or even plants specifically, that are about like the Levant or Palestine or Holy Land or Bilad el-Sham. Like there just aren't that many. Like literally this month, Layla came out with the first book that I have seen in English. It's called The Land in Our Bones, and it like really is up, you know, it's book about practice, but those have been hard to come by, again, if you don't speak Arabic. And so that's what I was excited about. I was excited about the tea recipe.
Whatever brings you over.
And I started following Wafa on social media, and at that point she was still just teaching in person. So I was like, well, I'm never going to be on the East Coast. I live on unceded Coast Salish territory on the West Coast, and I was just like, yeah, that's not going to be a thing probably. I didn't know she was from Portland. But I thought about it. I was like, someday I would love to do this, even though I don't know anything about cross-stitch, which is what I thought Tatreez was. And then as the story goes, you've already heard this story so many times, but the pandemic happened. And I actually, a month before the pandemic, Wafa came to Seattle, and I was going to take a class from her, and my husband got sick, and we couldn't go. And then the pandemic happened, and I was like, okay, well, this is the opportunity. Like, I'm just going to take one of these online classes. And I'm going to be honest with you. I was not a natural. I was like, what is this finicky thing where you're supposed to have a clean back? And like, I was just like, not for me, thank you.
Well, your ancestors were rebels, so I understand.
They might have just been some of those people who are not that good at
I think they just did it their own way. Which I can respect.
But yeah, so I really honestly, like, I also, to be totally honest, and this might be a complicated subject, I'm about to get Tatreez cancelled. I don't do Ada cloth, like, at all.
Okay.
Like, I did a bunch of Ada projects early on, because that's what I was told that was needed to happen, and I didn't really like it, and I was like, what is the point of this? Like, I'm just gonna make don't cancel me, bunch of needlepoint pillows or something. Like, I was
will not cancel you.
I really wanted to make something that I could wear.
Yeah.
You're a wearable person.
That's always been like my interest in clothing. And I was like, well, I'm not going to make a thobe. Like, I had at that point had never seen a thobe except in a picture. And so Wafa offered a denim jacket class. And I took it without ever taking a waist canvas class. I had
You're ambitious.
Oh my God. I'm still scared. Yeah, me too. I'm still scared. I refuse.
It was a nightmare. Like,
Oh,
not for
gosh.
anything else, but like, denim is just not easy to stitch on.
Yeah.
And I wasn't an experienced stitcher. It was all the stars of Palestine, some of which are quite complicated, actually. So it actually took me...
beautiful.
It was lovely, but it took me like 3.5 years to complete. I did a lot of other things in between.
Yeah.
And this is the only time ever in my life that I have been overly ambitious. But somehow I was like, I'm just going to do this. Like, she's offering this class. I'm going to take it. I'm going to make this denim jacket. And through that, because it was so difficult, I actually did then enjoy stitching on other materials. I was like, wait, I could stitch on cotton or like linen. Like, this is so chill and amazing. But the thing that really pushed me over into Tatreez was actually the art historical context class that Wafa teaches. I'm kind of a brains person. And I have like a lot of interest in folk culture in general as like a subject of study. And there was something about that class that like put it in this context that reading books had not before. I think Wafa's a really good academic teacher. Like, she's really good at teaching the thing itself, which is Tatreez. But like the way that she teaches researching things and teaches like the broader context and the story of things and how it's like complicated and how she challenges you to think about things, like that's actually what really got me super into it. It was the combination of the idea that I could like make clothing that's contemporary that I could wear as like a present day Palestinian peasant to live in the country.
I love it.
And it was that intellectual piece where she was like, look at these things through this lens, and somehow that made it become more alive for me in this way that like felt like this was a thing I could learn. Like, I'm not going to learn how to speak Arabic fluently. I'm just not. I'm too old. I don't have the, like, it's just not going to happen. And I'm never going to be, like, an expert in, like, I've never been to Palestine, hopefully someday. But, like, there's all these things that I can't actually learn. But what that class taught me was that I could actually learn how to speak this language, which is what it is. It is a secret language. And it's a personal language, and it's a collective language of our people. And that was like the thing where I was like, okay, I'm in. Like, this is a language I can learn and study, and someone's teaching it in a language that I can understand. And that felt really accessible. So being a huge nerd, I think, is my entry point into Tatreez.
Well, no, so this is actually a really good segue into one of the questions we wanted to ask you, which is basically this intersection between like culture or folk culture, as you call it, and resistance movements, right? So could you help us and our listeners like just get grounded in how we think about resistance when it comes to the use of folk art and craft?
Okay, so am I about to get Tatreez canceled again?
No, you are not.
No, you don't know
Defend you.
You all don't know what I'm about to say.
Okay, so maybe I won't defend you. Maybe I'll cancel you.
Yeah. Well, don't just like blanket endorse people. So, I mean, there's like kind of two aspects to that, right? Which is like, so I actually have taught about folk culture as a folk herbalist a lot longer than my
Okay, wait,
entry
pause. Can you define folk herbalism?
Folk herbalist. Okay.
Yeah.
So a folk herbalist would be somebody whose practice in herbalism, like I'm not a clinical herbalist. I'm not a naturopathic doctor. I do some clinical stuff in terms of like working with clients, but one part of folk herbalism to me specifically is that while I have gotten a lot of my herbal education in like the US, where they call it the traditional Western herbalism, it is neither traditional nor Western. White people be stealing things. My own practice was like very grounded in growing up like in like a very specific bioregion, like growing up in Finland and learning the plants of Finland, and that's what I ground my practice in, and how I work with herbs and work with plants in general. And specifically in Finnish style, like folk herbalism, I would say that it probably would remind a lot of, like, if I could speak Arabic and I could speak to our great-grandmas, they would probably agree with this, which is that there's, like, very little difference between food, medicine, and holy things. Like, food, medicine, and spiritual practices. Yeah. So that's, like, one part of it. It's, like, like, we use maramia for all kinds of ailments, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. For, like, pretty much
staple. Yep.
Everything but the kitchen sink. But, like, maramia is also something that Wafa specifically speaks of, and I actually took this idea and put it in my denim jacket, of finding an amulet that's full of maramia. And as an herbalist, like I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense to me. Like it's a protective amulet. Maramia is an aromatic plant. That's something that we burn like as incense to make offerings. And then it also just makes sense from a practical perspective, because if it's in an amulet and you perspire, it releases a scent onto your body. And so it's all of those things combined together is how my folk herbalism practices. So, the folk in English, that word, right? And I'd love to hear your take on Palestinian Arabic, or just Arabic in general version of this. Folk means the people, right? So folk music is the people's music. Folk dress is the people's dress. And in general, in the olden days, that would be as in, it's not the dress of the elites. It's not the dress of the rulership. It's not the songs of the rulership. It is not the food of the ruling class people. It is and I'm using a small I here, indigenous to the land cultural practice, right?
Yeah.
And so folk culture is the people's culture. And it's really interesting to think about it in terms of Tatreez, right? Because these dresses, this practice, like one of the things that really clicked for me is that they are peasant dresses. These incredibly ornate, locally made, like literally from the land, like there was trade within the region, but a lot of the like dyes, the wool, the other fibers were locally created, made by local people, made by the community, and then the dress was embroidered by the community. If especially for folks where you lived in a village, like people took panels, they embroidered them together. These incredibly ornate, like imagine what like a mèche de la vie dress would cost today. It is handmade silk.
Yeah.
And yet a peasant woman wore that. Like I have a couple that are worn and torn, and they were worn by ordinary women who were farmers. They tended orchards, they tended animals, they tended children, and they were artists. This is like Wafa talks about this all the time, how like the difference between high art, like art that we put in museums, and folk art is that folk art is useful.
Yeah.
Which is
practical. Yes.
Which is such a Western concept of art, because all art used to be useful, and most people in most folk cultures used to be artists. They made something, and some people were better at it, and they got paid to do it, and some people did it on the side. And I always have to tell people in my classes, I'm 100% sure that not all Palestinian women love to embroider or did it, even if it was traditional for their region.
Yeah, of course.
Sure,
they were good at other things, but most people made something. And, you know, like if I make my own wooden spoon, maybe it's not that great. Maybe other people make better wooden spoons. Maybe I trade them for the thing I make. But, like, they are these products of a place and a culture. And the people's culture has always been the thing that no matter what empire you live under, they can never take away from you. So that's one of the things about, like, colonization is that, and I am not going to apply this to this current situation, but in general, like when people come in and try and take over a culture, they can never take over the people's culture, because the people's culture is food and music and children's stories and things that women and old people and queer people and little kids are interested in. And that stuff just lives inside. It's enmeshed. It is literally like a mèche de la vie weaving, where you have two different kinds of fabric that make up a piece of cloth. So
Okay, I'm still waiting for the cancellation.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
the part that's the part where I'm gonna talk about resistance. Yeah, so especially in a situation, so that's the people's culture, right? It is really hard to destroy, but of course it's not impossible to destroy. And that is why, whether it is here or whether it was in Finland during the Swedish Empire that colonized Finland, or the Russian Empire that colonized Finland, or whether it's in Palestine, the occupier, if they want to take over, whether it's the resources of the country or the entire landmass of the country, and I'm not using country like as like a nation state, I'm using like I'm speaking of it as the land.
Yeah.
If you want to take it over, you have to try to destroy the things that make the indigenous people of the land the indigenous people of the land. And it is difficult to do, but it is the mandate in some ways of the settler colonial empire. And so practicing folk culture is resistance in the sense that it is placing ourselves into the continuum of that culture. So a real living culture is not a static thing, right?
Yeah.
The British Museum can have every thobe on earth because they stole them from us at what they consider the peak of our culture right before colonization. The same thing has happened here on Turtle Island. The museums, the things that you see in the museum are just the things that we consider peak culture, because a lot of people's ancestors here destroyed, or tried rather, did not succeed. Indigenous people here have resisted colonization for 500 years. They are our role models. Indigenous people never give up. But like, there is no peak culture. It is not static. Like, if we had gotten to do what we would have naturally done as people, those dresses in the British Museum probably wouldn't even exist anymore. They might be. There might be a few in a Palestinian museum. Some would have been buried with their wearers. Some would exist in pieces in other thobes. That's what we did.
Yeah.
And so practicing that culture, I do believe, is a form of resistance. It is resisting cultural erasure and cultural genocide.
Completely agree. There's a few things that you said that like really stood out to me. I think one, I am 100% aligned with the idea of Tatreez is art. I hate the idea of like this differentiation between fine art and folk art or crafts. Like, no, it's art. Like, if you call it art, it's art. Like, if if you created it with the intention of it being visually beautiful, it's art. Or if visually interesting, whatever. If you create it with that intention, it's art. So right there, we're right here on that one. I love, love, love that perspective. And I really like how you put into perspective and how you broke down this idea of like, what is folk? What is folklore? What is folk culture? Because, I think instantly, as a Palestinian in the American diaspora, when I think of folk, I don't necessarily think of negative, but I think similar to you. It's like, I think of like, quote unquote, the peasants, quote unquote, the fallahin, and even when I think about, again, specifically Palestinian American diaspora culture, there was a time period where Tatreez or wearing a thob was like seen as like, girl, why are you doing that? That's like old school. That's like a fallahi thing. And it's like, we are fallahi. What are you talking about? But it's very interesting because there was this time period where I feel like it was looked down upon. And now it's this like, taking back of that and really seeing the beauty in that, and seeing that folk art, folk culture is so important and the foundation of who we are today. Sorry, I'm like going on a little tangent, but those like the two things really stood out to me as you were talking about that. And I think it's a really interesting thought to just like really sit and be like, what does folk mean to you? So I definitely encourage the listeners to do that as well.
And like our people, like with love, like when people think about folk, they're like, oh yeah, like white girls from Ireland wearing white peasant blouses.
Yeah.
It's like, who did it first and who did it better? We invented farm to table food. We invented grain. I mean, all of my Swana friends and I have like fights about who invented what. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like, we are a peasant people in many ways. We are not just a peasant people. There's lots of differentiation between like city dwellers and semi-nomadic Bedouin and all this, but that is sort of, and has always been the sort of a lot of cultures, is the people of the land.
Yeah. And that's not a negative. That's not a negative. I think that's important.
It's not.
Yeah.
But what I will say about Tatreez as resistance, though, is that so like I would just say like a year ago I feel like I started writing and thinking about, I mean this is a longer project than that, but just about like culture as resistance, like how, and this is not my idea, like Wafa talks about like, or early on talked about the Tatreez revolution. It is something that in the diaspora was negated to the margins. I was surprised but pleased for myself, I guess, to learn that I'm not and through your podcast too, like I'm not the only person who didn't learn from like their Tata or their Kulti or, from a family member. It's just, survival necessitates different things for people. And that is a process that's happened to a lot of people, for instance, in like what we currently call, and hopefully not for long, America. A lot of people came here. You look at pictures of Ellis Island, people come here. They look totally different than they do weeks later, let alone a generation. And it was really heartening to hear from people who have held on to that for multiple generations, like the interview you did where, it's people who left before the Nakba who still hold on to that. Like, that's what I absolutely want for us. And here comes the part where I'm about to get canceled. So as an Occupy people in the diaspora, in exile, in currently experiencing genocide, in all these fragmented pieces that we are. Absolutely, I think that culture is resistance. It is how we cope, like seeing pictures of children in Khase who are embroidering, like there's all these different pieces. And I will say for those of us in the West living at the imperial core, which is where we are, we are currently kind of calling everything but the kitchen sink resistance, except actual resistance. So existence at the imperial core is not resistance unless you are of the indigenous people of this land who actually still live under unsettler colonial occupation. I would say that in some ways, like, this might be a side tangent, but our people have benefited tremendously from the resistance of the indigenous people of Turtle Island.
Yeah.
I feel like I know a lot of people who haven't been in movement spaces where like, oh, indigenous people and black folks go hard for us. And it's like, yeah, and it's about time we notice that and pay it forward for the language and support that we have gained from them. And I think that for me at this point, I feel very differently about this than I did 4 months ago, and I still 100% believe that culture is resistance.
Yeah.
But like, as a child of someone who was in a actual resistance movement and likely died in a actual resistance movement, and was part of the arts and culture department of that resistance movement that also included all forms of resistance, I just want to remind us that like, there is no intifada dress without an intifada.
Yeah. Very fair call. Yeah.
I think that a lot of us here in the West, and specifically on this continent, in this country right now, are very enamored with the aesthetics of liberation and not the practice of liberation. We are continuing to pour a lot of our resources into the existing channels of the settler colonial empire. A lot of us have been offered the opportunity to be settlers on other people's land if we just participate in this project, if we participate in the settlement of other people's land, in the extraction of resources, if we participate in this colonial project. And I don't think that we get to decry a colonial project elsewhere while we're literally living at the core of what funds it. And that's not necessarily to speak to like Palestinians get to do whatever we need to do right now. But I would just like want to point out to that like the reason why, for instance, intifada thobes, which for folks who aren't familiar are thobes that specifically were created by women during the first intifada because so many protest tools were taken away from them from Palestinians, including the ability to show the Palestinian flag. And they, at that time, would not get stripped of their clothing if they displayed it. So they produced this incredibly resilient art piece. It takes a long time to embroider thobe, so you know that the resistance will go on for a long time. It is not the same as painting a sign. Painting a sign is a one-time endeavor. Making a thobe is a months-long endeavor. Yeah. And just thinking about that, like, that is a direct response to oppression, and that is not the only thing that these people were doing. They were resisting with their bodies. They were resisting in various ways. And I just want to remind us of that is also part of our resistance. And that's not shading the idea that, like, our culture is resistance. It's just sort of, like, thinking about it from this perspective, too, that for us to be Palestinians in the diaspora, there has to be a Palestine. And at this rate, we live in the place that can stop what is happening and can push forward our liberation if we actually use tools. And I don't mean just calling your congressman, girl, he ain't never gonna call you back. Just putting that out there. After 4 months of calling Congress people, there are other things that folks need to do. And those things exist in our resistance movements in the past. I'm not saying copy those. I'm just saying that is part, like, rather than saying that existence is resistance, as Palestinians, resistance is our existence. We exist in part because our ancestors resisted, and it is our duty to continue to do that. And there's lots of different forms, but I'm just going to say that, like, yeah, a lot of, like, my dad didn't just go out there and make resistance art. Yeah. And there needs to be maybe I don't want to say less resistance art and more resistance, but maybe there could be more resistance on the side of the art.
Yeah.
I get canceled yet?
No, I actually, no. I actually think that's a really, really important reminder, especially to those of us in the diaspora, because we have the privilege of, doing more. And no, I completely hear you. And I think what you're saying is, like, this, whether it's, whatever art form, whatever culture, it's one small piece of it, but there needs to be more. There's more to the toolkit of resistance. And, I agree with you. It's 4 months in, like, are we still calling our Congress people? Are we still calling our reps? Like, what is that doing? Like, what do we have? Where do we take it from there? So I completely hear you. I don't think that's cancelable language.
And to that, I will also just say that it continues to suck that is up to us as Palestinians. And those of you who are listening who are not Palestinians, we should be able to, in this time, not have to be in the front lines. And yet we are. Every Palestinian I know is busy. Yeah. We're busy. Everybody's organizing. Everybody's fundraising. Everybody's doing things. And I'm not, saying that people aren't doing enough. I think I'm just saying that for me, resistance is a thing that takes different forms at different times. Yeah. And right now, it is not enough for me to embroider from my positionality. Yeah. And that's not, there are other people who have other work to do. But that whole thing about how everybody has their role in liberation, I tend to shade my white friends about how they always want their role to be like the cute, fun part of it. Yeah. And I think this is just a shoulder to the wheel moment for any of us who have any form of access and ability. And I think those of us who live here, we do have a lot of it. We have a lot more we have so much more power than people who have to throw rocks at tanks. Yeah. And yet we're afraid to use it, as though we are the ones who are going to suffer the most. And that, again, I'm fully acknowledging that, like, as a Palestinian, it is terrifying to be Palestinian right now. Yeah. There's a lot of facets to this, but I think the thing I want to remind us of is that we come from like 100-year resistance. 100-year resistance. The longest, and this is just how my brain works, but like the longest modern general strike was orchestrated and executed by Palestinian peasants against the British. At a time when we also all started wearing kufiya, which was mostly a Bedouin garment, because, of course, white colonizers can't tell people apart if they're wearing the same outfit. Like, we come from this long line of, like, a lot of tools. Yeah. And I just want us to use them. Because I'm proud of that heritage.
Yeah. I will say, though, I think maybe the word resistance is kind of thrown around a lot, and not, like, you're really making me think, for example, on when I use it, how I use it. But I do think there's something really powerful about bringing more Palestinians into the tradition of Tatreez and supporting their Tatreez journeys as we continue to fight for a free Palestine. It's maybe the word resistance is not appropriate, but there is something about that I think is important as we plan for a free Palestine. So I don't know.
I agree with you. Like, you all, and I know we're almost at time, but you all often ask people about the communities that people have built through Tatreez. And I feel like for me, like, I would love it if in this time we could just have Tatreez circles for all of us to, like, take a breather. Yeah. But those are also places, again, since the beginning of time, women have gathered to stitch and talk politics. Yeah. Like, that is, it is not how it's framed, and it definitely wasn't how it was framed in patriarchal societies, but that is how it works. And whether, now we have these circles of queer folks and women and men and people who, it's not defined by gender anymore, but those should be not just places of, like, oh, it's resistance because we're getting together. It's like, this is how we strategize, plan, and meet people who can help us do things. Yes. And that's what actually, like, as, like, a lifelong grassroots organizer and as, like, a child of organizers, that's what organizing is. Yeah. It's about people, but it isn't just about getting people together and doing a thing. It is about getting people together and doing politics. And I think that a lot of people in the West are not used to doing politics in other endeavors. And yet, like we say, being Palestinian is political, and therefore Tatreez is inherently political, and therefore it is part of our resistance. It's just that it is, like, it is not just a stitching, and it's not just copying Intifada designs from 1986. It's about organizing the way that our people know-how. And I see that in us. Like Palestinians are busy right now.
Yes.
And I think that we can embody that even more, because the one thing that I think has come through in this time is that we do not have much to lose.
Yes.
And that is something that, like, again, folk rebellions start with people who don't have a lot to lose. And I think that that's a bravery that our people are uniquely capable of and have a heritage in, you know? And so, yeah, I've definitely feel like I'm very happy that I have had a stitching community of, so we don't do Tatreez because there's just not enough Palestinians to start with. But we call our SWANA, Portland SWANA Stitch, and because it's kind of a community of people who are already predisposed to organizing, it's actually really nice to have a space that's like all kinds of SWANA people who are helping with Palestine organizing. Because also we are all tiny minorities.
Yes.
You know, so indigenous people, Black folks, Iranians, you know, Sudanese people, unless you happen to live in a major concentration center of your kinds of people, we are all tiny minorities. And bringing each other together under whatever it is, but particularly culture, is a way to build relationships.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, Lena, you're making me think of like it's sort of a two-way thing where it's like just straight up political organizing has not worked for us super well in this time, clearly, in so many different ways. And I think like just straight up doing culture and nothing else is also not the answer, but bringing the two things together, again, is like that Mèche de la Vie fabric. You know, two disparate fibers are actually really strong and beautiful together. And I think that's something that, you know, we are ingenious in this way as a people.
Yes.
We really are.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so powerful. Yes.
And for people who are in the Portland area, you know, you talked about you guys have a SWANA community, specifically a SWANA stitching community. A lot of you guys are organizers, and if someone was local and they wanted to get involved, like how could they participate?
So we actually we have a third space, like an actual third space, which is in organizing terms a space that's like nobody's job and nobody's home. It's called SWANA Rose PDX. And we do a lot of cultural programming from the SWANA region. So we have a monthly stitch. And there's a bunch of other cultural programming. They do a movie night. They, you know, organize informational things. And yeah, it's open, and it is often the things are not just open to SWANA folks, they're also open to other community. And we are trying to build bridges with all kinds of communities, but particularly marginalized communities, because, you know, on this end of the West Coast, it's pretty white.
Yeah.
So again, it's that coalition building work. Yeah, and then I've also gotten to go to Seattle has Seattle Resistance Tatreez. That's run by my friend Hala.
Yeah.
So that's another West Coast space that, you know, is up here in the frigid north.
It's really amazing that you guys have a third space, though. That's like it's so rare and hard to find, but I feel like that is just so important to have. I'm very jealous, I'm not going to lie.
Come visit.
I will.
Come visit.
I know, it's on my list. You're not that far either.
I know. We'll drag Lena out here too.
Yeah,
I'm down.
seriously.
Just let me know. I'm down.
Lena's ready. You just gotta
I'm
give
ready.
her dates and she's
Yeah.
down.
Yeah,
Like,
very easy.
It doesn't take much to convince her.
She's a very cosmopolitan person. We can fly her over for 5
Yeah,
hours.
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and also before we leave you today, I know you are working on a ton of different stuff, but can you share any of the projects that you are working on right now and what people can expect to see from you soon?
So this is not Tatreez related, but is Palestine related, which I have been so frustrated with the grassroots organizing that I actually compiled a 101 guide on. It's mostly on specifically Palestine organizing, but you could probably sub any group with some additions and subtractions. And my friend Ali of Entangled Roots Press is going to sell it on her website, and that'll drop hopefully on Wednesday. It's called promise, not a statement. After the quote, Free Palestine is a promise, not a statement. And it's just a really small guide. And so after I pay all the S1E creators, I am going to use it to fundraise for those GoFundMes that we all need to just be fundraising for, because we can actually have a material impact on people's safety. So that's one project. And then, I love plugging other people's projects. So I just really, if you're interested in plants, like S1E plants, I haven't even cracked it, but I know Leila's book is going to be good. And that's The Land in Our Bones by Leila K. Fegali. I'm not pronouncing her name correctly, I'm pretty sure. And then
we'll put a link, don't worry.
Yeah, thank you. And then I do a, which I will send to you guys each if you send me your addresses, but I stole a pattern. I rematriated a pattern from the British Museum collection.
Yeah, we can't steal from the British. That doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, they stole it from us.
Exactly.
I'm actually working on a little booklet of all the designs I've rematriated, but I have one that I took back, and my friend Ali made prints out of them that are little patches. As a former punk, I'm like really into wearable patches, and they're also stitchable. So I'm also gonna have those available again for folks on my Instagram profile, which is I'm Pins and I'm Needles. And again, trying to just fundraise. I know we all are. Yeah. And I feel like the one thing I also hear from Palestinians, it feels so weird that we're like doing like... Yeah, we're just all like doing our, like, Lena, you just stitched something for a raffle, you know, like it's like we're trying to fundraise for this enormous disaster. Yeah. And yet that's what I see from our people from like October 8th onwards. Like that's all, you know, our people do. Like we hosted a textile art show at S1E Rose in conjunction with the Portland Textile Month. And it was literally like a week after. And at the opening, and this is like kind of the middle point of the culture and the resistance part, like I just like looked around and I was like, this is what our people do. Like we have never been given the opportunity to wallow. Yeah, we fight. Yeah. And I think the thing that I just really like, I think about that so much, and I want all of us to remember that, like, that is our heritage and ability, and someday when we have a free Palestine, we'll actually just get to sit by the well and stitch and not have to fight. And that's the goal, right?
Yeah. Just being together and just stitching and not having to worry. I think that's a beautiful dream and a beautiful promise.
Thank you so much for making this space a part of that.
Of course, thank you.
It really does feel like, you know, bridging something for all of us all around the world. And this is what our people do.
We are constantly on, I know.
Well, we're glad that you came and shared your story. And I know you already kind of mentioned, but just to remind people, where can they find you online?
Not a lot of places, but you can find me at I'm Pins and I'm Needles on Instagram. I don't post a lot because I'm busy. But before all of this, I did post about Tatreez, and maybe I will again someday. Yeah, and sure in general, you know, come find me at S1E Rose Center in Portland. I'll be out there. We have a whole textile program.
That's amazing.
So cool. And Lena and I will definitely come visit.
Excellent. Yeah. We're booking visiting teachers, so this conversation will continue off the record. Okay. Stay tuned, listeners.
Excited. Oh, wait. And isn't there something that you are going to be doing in Finland soon?
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. So if there's any Finnish listeners, which there will be, Tatreez työpaja Suomessa. Sims Helsingin tiliä seuraamalla saatte tietää lisää. Thanks, guys.
What she said. Thank you so much, Veera. We loved chatting with you. And we will talk to you soon.
Kiitos paljon. Hei hei.
Another amazing conversation. That was great. I was legit. I mean, if we release the video, you guys will see that I was just like all up in my computer screen the whole time because Veera was just so captivating, and everything she said, I was just like, yes, yes, co-signing, yes, I'm right there with you. But I think she had a lot of great things to say and a lot of great reminders for us. You know, I think especially she joked that she was going to get canceled, but I think we all understand where she was coming from, you know, that Tatreez or art is just one part of resistance, and there's so much more for us to do. So yeah, it was just great hearing everything she had to say.
Yeah. No, and I mean, these are conversations that are like, that's what this podcast is all about, right? It's not just about like everyone agreeing on everything. Yeah. It's about having these, like, challenging each other and thinking a little bit more about what we say and how we say it, the words we choose. Like, these things really do matter. And she really made me think, you know, after this episode, and I think that's a good thing. That means growth is happening live, you know, in real time, which is really, really fascinating. But honestly, I think actually my favorite part of the episode was her explanation of folk art and folk herbalism, and like what I like, that also is really powerful. Again, like, language matters, and how you know, discuss these types of things is really important. Like, it's that context matters, like the definitions matter, and how it impacts everything else. Like, everything is so connected. So I thought that was also quite powerful. I really quite enjoyed just hearing her speak through all of it. She's clearly done a lot of work in learning about all of it. Like, this is her expertise, right? So it was really great to have that shine through in this conversation. And I love it.
Yeah, no, I know. You know me, I'm the gossip. And I really wanted to talk more about her parents because I was like, girl, what? Tell me more. I want to know about this compound party. Because that was hella fun. But like, her parents honestly sound very dope. They sound like amazing people. And I know that she grew up with her mother, but her mother sounds so cool. Like, and you can see, like, you know, Veera was talking a lot about how she has this like connection and is very drawn to folk costume and stuff. And like, her mom's a costume designer, a theater costume designer and all that. So you can very much see that inspiration. And then of course both of her parents, both her mother and her father, very much stood, and her mother still stands, for Palestinian liberation. So you also see that coming from her parents. So just a very, very cool story and cool experience. And I was very giddy when she ended it in Finnish. I don't know what the hell she said. Hopefully she didn't say anything crazy. Honestly, I would love if she said something crazy. Let's be real.
Oh man, but again, like, we're all super interconnected, right? Like, Palestinians are all over the world, and that, I think, that's where our power lies, if we can tap into it. And I think she literally just spoke that out in this conversation, and I think that's just really, really powerful. So stay tuned, listeners, for all of the things from at I'm Pins and I'm Needles, because she's doing some really, really cool stuff on the ground in Portland, and just more generally, more broadly. So good. Okay, so thank you guys again for listening to Tatreez Talk. We want to hear about your Tatreez journeys, so please share your stories with us at tatreeztalk@gmail.com, and we might just have you on an upcoming episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform, and be sure to leave a 5-star review. You can follow me at Lina Stolb and Amani at Minamani, and make sure you follow the pod at Tatreez Talk.